Welcome back to Truth Hurts, where we expose corrupt politicians, lying corporate media. I'm Jake Duesenberg, your host, broadcasting live from Roseville, Minnesota, in the belly of the beast, the liberal zombie apocalypse of Minneapolis and St. Paul. I got a great show for you guys today. Even if you're not watching live, I'm glad you're joining us because I think you're going to. I hope you're going to learn something. I think you can find out that we can have debates and conversations and still be friends. I think that in the world of politics today, people are so fearful that can even exist, which is just insane. That's like what our country was based off of. The reason we have a First Amendment is we can have debates. Now, my theory is those debates should also happen in Congress before we go to war. So that's going to be my central argument when I start out this debate with my MAGA friend, Don, who is going to join us in just a second. This show is brought to you by Alpine Cabinetry in the great city of St. Cloud, Minnesota. We're also brought to you by Elite Guardian, mn.com. If you are looking to get your Minnesota permit to carry, we have we have two classes on Monday and a virtual class probably coming up on Sunday. So just go to Elite Guardian, mn.com. Okay, joining us from the sunny state of Florida, which looks so much progressively better than Minnesota. I don't mean progressively in the bad way. Don, you're so unoriginal. A Minnesotan who left, a productive Minnesotan who left Minnesota and went to Florida. You're not the first, okay? You're probably the 100,000th, and I don't blame you for that. We're still sticking it up here in the bold north, as they say. But you were on my Facebook page and you said you would take the counter position and would love to debate me on this issue, because my position is that I think this war in Iran is a foolish errand and I think it's unconstitutional. I don't think the president has the power to do this unilaterally. Am I describing this fair, that you take the opposite position?
Well, whether or not it's constitutional is really a legal argument. I mean, with a lot of the supplemental laws that were created even as far back as Clinton, the Constitution is very raw and very pure in the way it words things, but it's a two-sided sword. On one hand, it's very direct. On the other hand, it leaves a lot of room for ambiguity. And so over the course of 240 years, politicians have taken the side of kind of using the ambiguity side of it to make laws that violate the Constitution. And I'm not a fan of any of that at all. I like the original content and original meaning of the Constitution, but there's no denying, I don't think, that there is a pretty easy to prove justification legally for what Trump has done in the same way Obama did thing in prior presidents. We have presidents that have abused constitutional language all the way back to Adams and Jefferson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jefferson violated constitutional authority literally by buying the Louisiana Purchase. Mm-hmm. Completely illegal, violated the Constitution. Lincoln, Jackson, like we could go through the whole history of presidents. I think there's an underlying theme in these constitutional violations is whether or not it's good for either the United States and its citizens individually as a country or for global humanity, we'll call it, right? So is it good for the globe? Is it good for the people of another country? Is it good for the people in our country? So Jefferson violates even his own personal mantra, which is the president has no power, walks around in his slippers, and no seating arrangement in the White House, right? Everybody is equal, and then violates it specifically and altruistically under the idea that America needs all this room to grow. Why? Because he knows in his head the Constitution limits him from doing something that would be really, really good for America. And so the Constitution, in a sense, gives presidents kind of that authority in it. And you could say it's dictatorial and you could make a lot of claims to what those individual decisions are. But at the end of the day, the Constitution trusts the altruicity of the president in office at the time. Now, I think into the future and after 200 plus years of ambiguity in the Constitution, that we have way too much federal code, way too much executive power, way too much. But that's all because politicians in Congress don't want to have to vote. You know that, right? They don't want to.
Yeah, of course.
They don't want to be responsible for something. If they can shrug off responsibility, then that's their whole goal. So, in a very individualistic sense, Is it constitutionally allowed right now? I think the answer is legally yes. I was completely against what Trump did with
Wait a second. I felt like you weren't making that argument. It's that I thought your argument here was that a lot of the other presidents have done this, including Thomas Jefferson, and so therefore it's not. But now you're saying it is constitutional.
well, no, it's not constitutional. There's legality that gives now Trump and other presidents before him, even Obama, authority to use military power in the way that they even Obama
Well,
used.
what's the legality? Because you know the supremacy clause of the Constitution is no law is more well the law of the law of the land is the United States Constitution. It's the supreme law of the land.
Right.
So you can't even quote some kind of statute. It's like if it's not pursuant to the Constitution, it's repugnant.
But we have legislation that gives the president authority to make these kind of unilateral military decisions. And what is the law I'm thinking of? I'm trying to think of.
Well, you're probably referring to the War Powers Resolution in 1973, and I think that's one of my beef with a lot of people on the right. And this is why I really appreciate you coming on the show because there's so many people that I just feel are making just horrible arguments or not even really responding to like the things I've been saying because this is my core issue is that and this is my core issue in COVID is we were going up against Tim Walz. You did too. I was looking for a picture for the show, for the thumbnail, and I
Right.
found that one where you were wearing like the white
The
suit, in
Tyvek
front of
suit.
Walz's office because you and I said, hey, one person, one governor can't just unilaterally decide to shut down the state of Minnesota and lock us
Exactly.
in our homes. And so that's the way I feel about war. I mean, war is like the ultimate action of government. It involves human lives and capital. And
Right.
one person shouldn't be able to do that. And so the War Powers Resolution kind of reestablishes it. And so if you could just bear with me here for a second, I think it's real important for people to understand what it says because I just don't.
Yeah.
Mark Wayne Mullen, I did a response video to him. By the way, the new Department of Homeland Security just got announced. Kristi Noem got sacked, and Mark Wayne Mullen, senator from Oklahoma, is now going to apparently be the Department of Homeland Security secretary. So he didn't even get this right. This is the War Powers Resolution 1973, which says that the president can only do or commit troops, armed forces, into hostilities with one or three conditions. One's a declaration of war. Article 1, Section 8 gives that to Congress. Number 2 is specific statutory authorization. So like the AUMF that brought us in Iraq or the AUMF that was for 9/11. So it gave us clarity to go to war in Afghanistan. And then the third one is a national emergency created by an attack upon the United States. And it's just like, well, what part of that is at play here? And I don't see that being in play. And I don't think there's been a strong argument from anyone on it.
There. Well, the argument that I think is kind of being missed is, and it's not going to be. I don't think it's going to be good for the United States as a whole long term. But there's a lot of things that happened in the Israeli war that were basically, I think, preempted and planned, right?
Can you tell me what you mean by Israeli war?
But the Gaza, the
Okay.
occupation of Gaza, and the
We have to clarify because there's been a lot of wars.
okay, so we have this. I mean, the history of Gaza goes way back. Obviously, we have a lot of history with hatred of the West and the global jihad from the early 1900s. All of this stuff. The Balfour Declaration, so on and so forth. So we're in this place now, and Israel's in this place where the first kind of marker that I saw that was interesting was the Abraham Accords. And we didn't have a lot of sign on to the Abraham Accords. We had, I think, 5 countries total that have signed on to the Abraham Accords. And if you read the Abraham Accords, basically all it says is if you recognize Israel as the state, so you're a Muslim country, you recognize Israel as the state, that we will make you a part of the Western economy. We will share global banking, technology, so on and so forth, via Israel into the Middle East. And it didn't get a lot of sign on initially because there's one big problem with a post petroleum Middle Eastern economy, right? And that problem is you have groups of people sponsored by a state, only one now, that can go into Syria. And when Syria builds an IBM factory and blow it up. It creates a lot of economic instability when you have violent instability in your region that's never ever really been dealt with. So the Abraham Accords are a way to get Muslim countries to give up the religious argument, right? And come to Western style banking and economics post petroleum, which hasn't happened, but we all know where the movement is, right? So the Middle East, which was nothing before oil, now has oil and is something. But if oil demand goes away, which Trump proved in his first term that he could make go away because he made the US what? Oil independent.
Yeah, but that's we're not even the biggest consumer of
No,
oil from the Middle East, so I don't know why you say
no,
go
no.
away.
But because the rest of the world still relies, especially Europe, relies on Middle Eastern oil, right? So, but what he's showing them in his first term was the U.S. didn't have to be dependent on OPEC, the old systems of OPEC that we used to play around with in the 70s. So the Middle East, a lot of Middle Eastern countries look at that and go, we have no other economic activity. We have no real other economic advantage in the world outside of oil. And so if we move to a post petroleum economy, we have a whole section of the Middle East that all of a sudden becomes economically unstable and then, of course, socially unstable. So, but that's the purpose of the Abraham Accords. And you go, well, why does Trump need, or why do we need people on the Western side of the economic banking structure? Well, because all of a sudden we have this thing called BRIC, which I'll call the Eastern side of global economics, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, that are out recruiting countries to be a part of the Eastern global economy. Abraham Accords goes out and tries to get countries to come to the Western style, the Western dollar of economic activity, right? By guaranteeing them such and such, all the access to American and Western banking. If for instance, I think you know this, and maybe you don't, but if, you know, Brazil is still
I
so.
really don't know where you're going with all this, by the way.
So
It seems like you're meandering.
I'm not meandering. So it's kind of a bigger picture. So right now, if I had a daughter that went to Brazil on a study program and she lost her camera, and I could not wire her money from a U.S. bank to a Brazilian bank. U.S. banking, Western banking doesn't bank with Brazil because they
Okay.
don't trust the system, right?
Okay.
So Brazil, though, does bank internally, internationally, and electronically with Russia, India, China, part of BRIC. So they're not a part of the Western banking system. Ukraine is not a part of the Western banking system, right? So if you fast forward out of Trump's second term at the end, Trump was supposed to
I mean,
win
you're saying first term at the end?
first term, yeah. Trump should have won 2020. Netanyahu takes office again in 2022. I think he thinks at the time that Trump is going to be president because they're trying to expand the Abraham Accords in the Middle East. So you have the big players, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and stuff, that aren't signing on. Why? Because it takes a lot for them to go, well, we're going to recognize Israel as a state and we want to be a part of the Western economy. Well, they're not going to do that when the Middle East is still completely unstable, when there's still radical Islam running around the Middle East. So something happened in March of 2023 that preempted October 2023, and nobody paid any attention to it. There were some people that did, but most people didn't. In Where's the second most holy site in Islam?
Well, Medina would be the second. I think Mecca would be the first.
No, the second most holy site is actually the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, right? It sits on top of the second temple, which sits on top of the first temple. Jews are supposed to come home to temple worship, right? When their Messiah comes, blah blah blah. They can't build a temple, obviously, because the Dome of the Rock is sitting on top of it. So for 1,300 years, we've had this what they call the Muslim status quo in Israel, and that is Christians and Jews can say a prayer on Temple Mount, but just not near the Dome of the Rock, which is where all of their sacred sites are at, right? And Islam has enforced that with just the threat of violence. Okay. So you always wonder, like, why is the second most holy site in the middle of Jerusalem on the top of this? And how come Islam gets to tell people, Jews and Christians, that they can't pray there. Well, that changed. Israel changed the law, or made a law that negated the status quo. So they said any religion can openly pray on Temple Mount, anywhere on Temple Mount, even right next to the Dome of the Rock. But nobody enforced it until 2023. Now, there has been some minor little skirmishes where Jewish cabinet members or ministry department heads would go up close to the Dome of the Rock and they would say a Muslim prayer. But in March of 2023, the head of one of Netanyahu's conservative military ministries took an armed force up to the Dome of the Rock and said a Jewish prayer at the Dome of the Rock, right on sacred ground. Nobody paid attention to it. I did. I told my wife, I said, this is the start of World War III, right? Because if you want to get rid of Hamas as the destabilizing state-sponsored terrorist arm of radical Islam, you have to draw them out. You have to get them to attack you. You need a justification for going into Gaza and into Lebanon and destroying those military forces, right?
Okay, so your argument is Netanyahu. I still don't know how this is going to wrap
We'll
into Iran, but is he purposely, conducted that operation so that he would get Hamas to retaliate?
Yes.
And start October 7th?
Exactly. So the retaliation, so you have to see it this way. Netanyahu poked radical Islam really, really hard. In fact, if you read the stories in the Middle East of what happened on that day and the day after, Hamas and Hezbollah and radical Islam went ballistic. Like they vowed that this would be repaid. And they chose basically the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, I think, right, as the October date, 2023. And they did the attack. Now, all of a sudden, Israel has justification to do what? Annihilate Hamas. And what did...
Well, annihilate Gaza. Not even just
Well,
Hamas,
right, but the
Gaza.
idea is Hamas is just a bunch of guys that nobody knows what they look like, right? And they have families and they have kids and they have wives and they're all supposed to be in Gaza and nobody really can dig them out because they're all underground. I mean, the whole beeper thing was ingenious, right? How do you identify Hamas soldiers? Oh, it's the guy with his ear blown off or missing a thumb or half of his ass is gone, right? Because his pager blew up. It wasn't meant to kill them. It was meant to identify them. Same with Hezbollah. So the weeding into Lebanon was normal. I knew they would go there because that's the other arm of Iran that they still had to deal with. But one thing happened that nobody noticed, and that was none of the Middle Eastern countries supported Hamas or Iran or Hezbollah or Lebanon. Why? Why didn't Saudi Arabia, Syria, Afghanistan, why didn't these countries come to the aid of Hamas? Because over all of this is this idea that there will be a two-sided global economy, a Western economy and an Eastern economy, right? Do we want to be a part of BRIC, right? Who's Russia is trying to get everybody on the BRIC side, the Chinese, the Indians, and then we have the West actively trying to get people on their side of the global economy. So we'll call the Western dollar and the Eastern dollar, okay, just for fun, hypothetically.
I just thought this conversation was going to be so different. I gotta be.
I know.
Where are we even going with this, Don?
Okay, so we're gonna
get to Iran, right?
We're gonna get to Iran.
Oh God.
So when Trump was in office, he had all the sanctions against Iran, right? And so the idea, I think, was that when Netanyahu steps in 2022, Trump's there. He has all the pressure already applied to Iran economically. Their people are starving in the streets. They don't have any economy. If you want to get rid of a ruler, you starve out the people and they will turn on their ruler instantaneously.
It doesn't seem to work too often, by the way.
Right. Well,
that's the thinking.
So when Trump doesn't win, when we have this whole issue, all of a sudden Biden does what? He reinvests all the money back into Iran. He removes the economic sanctions and actually gives them money, right? That's what Biden does. So he's strengthening the radical Islam arm of the Middle East, which is contrary to what all of the countries in the Middle East want to see, which is the elimination of radical Islam from that region so that they can have economic stability again post petroleum. Trump gets reelected. We have the war going on actively in Gaza. Netanyahu says, I don't care what anybody says. I don't care about Biden's diplomats and we're going to have a two-nation state. I was like, none of that's going to happen. It's all gone. There will never, ever be a Palestine again, period. And
Yep.
Netanyahu is going to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yep.
The last part of the picture is Iran doesn't want Trump to be reelected because the first thing that happens if Trump is reelected is all the economic sanctions come back again. All right. Now you have Iran in a position where they've lost their Islamic arms, their radical terrorist arms, right, in Hamas and Hezbollah. They're basically ineffective and have no chance of doing anything. They can't coagulate. Can you get rid of the idea of radical Islam? Maybe not, but you got rid of all of the people that can commit the violence using radical Islam, which is just as good. But Iran now has to deal with the economic sanctions of Trump. And so, why are they focusing on Iran? Well, because Iran is the last player in radical Islam. They're the last state that's going to support radical Islam in the future, which again destabilizes what the West is trying to do, which is stabilize the economy of the Middle East for a post petroleum world that's soon to come. So, Iran gets trapped. Iran is in a position when Trump takes office of I'm either going to starve my citizens to death or they're going to come out and start rebelling against us. And we're either going to make a last stand, right? We're either going to fire nuclear weapons. We are a caged lion and a caged lion that hasn't been fed in 6 months. And we're either going to fight to the death to support radical Islam or we're going to roll over and let the West scratch our belly. We're going to let them set up that Western global economy in the Middle East, and we will no longer be the only official state sponsor of radical Islam in the Middle East. That's what all those other countries are waiting for. They're waiting for Iran to see what happens with Iran. They didn't sign on the Abraham Accords because of Iran, because if Iran is still there and they're going to make one big blast from the past and nuke everybody, they're not signing on in Abraham Accords. They're going to wait. So this is what this is about. Now, Iran.
Can I just stop you real quick?
Yeah.
You realize like the Muslim community is quite separated, right?
Yeah.
Quite segregated.
Yep.
In Iran being the head of the Shia sect of the Islamic religion. Yep. And it's a small sect of it. Obviously, Sunnis are far more popular. It's like, what, 90% of the Muslim world, something like that.
Right.
So you understand, like Saudi Arabia and all these other Arab states, and I would argue Syria is not like a peaceful like prosperous country, Muslim country, but all these people do not like the Ayatollah, do not like the Shia.
Right.
Okay, so you understand that.
Yep.
You think it's all economic here.
In 1980 or 1990, those countries would have supported Iran against any action from the West. None of these countries came out in support of either Iran or Hamas or Hezbollah because these other countries, they want radical Islam gone because they understand that they're never going to have a Western global economic region until radical Islam is eliminated.
Well, I kind of agree with you on that. I think that does explain some of the ones on the Arabian Peninsula that seem to be a very more moderate place, like especially Qatar, which I've been to.
The UAE.
UAE, Dubai.
Saudi Arabia eventually will come.
Billy 22 wrote this. This is actually interesting because I've been wondering the same thing since you brought this up. Where's this post-petroleum world idea coming from? I've never heard of this.
Well, the post-petroleum world is basically, I think a lot of science has recognized that everything that we use in order to create battery powers and electricity is actually not renewable. Oil is a renewable resource. So back in the 70s, they told us we would run out of oil. We've not only not run out of oil, we've discovered shit tons of more oil. Why? Because oil is constantly being made by the earth. It's the constant
Right.
conversion of carbon. Okay, so is oil renewable? The answer to that is yes. Is beryllium? No. Is copper? No. Is aluminum? No. Those are all rare earth minerals, which is the only thing you see this administration talking about. So all of the compacts, and this kind of leads still to a bigger picture, believe it or not. So let's get back to Iran. Iran is now deciding whether or not they're going to nuke, and maybe the U.S. government got some intel that said it looks like Iran, who's now under a lot of pressure, their leadership is willing to push a button, right? As kind
No,
of
what do you mean by that? What do you mean by push a
push the
button?
nuke button, send one over to Syria or one of their neighbors or one of the Muslim
Like a
countries.
ballistic missile, you're saying?
Yeah.
But certainly not a nuke. We're not making that argument here, are we?
Well, we don't. Nobody really knows.
Right, but that's
Biden gave
that's
him
the
enough money.
problem I have, and this is why I start the argument out with, this is a power that Congress should have, right? Is that, like, let's debate this stuff. Like, let's understand what
Yeah, there's no time to debate it.
what do you mean there's no time to debate it? We've been hearing this
We'll
war
go back to
propaganda
Jefferson. At the time that he made the decision to have Monroe make the deal with the French, you have to remember what was going on with the French at the time and what was happening in New Orleans. The French were not getting paid their lease payments or from the Spanish, so they were technically broke, right? So the Louisiana Purchase, the deal to sell it, was basically a one-time deal. You better hurry up because I guarantee you the Spanish or the English will buy it. So it was.
I really don't know what the Louisiana Purchase has
because they can't go into he can't go into Congress at Christmas time or wait for session and go, hey, we should all debate whether or not we should buy the Louisiana Purchase, because then all of the individual ideologies and greeds of the politicians.
I mean, expanding the United States beyond the Missouri River seems such a different topic of conversation than what we're having here about actually attacking what, the fourth largest military in the world, a sovereign nation. You know, yes, yeah, absolutely. Especially when it's halfway around the world.
No, but the world is a much smaller place now. Okay, it's not the same. So we're making those comparisons because the world is actually just as small as what the United States was back during Jefferson's time. But it still doesn't change what the purpose of squeezing Iran is. And you got to remember that all of the other Muslim countries are supporting the U.S. and Israeli action, because once Iran and the dictatorial Islamic State is removed from Iran, their ability to sponsor terrorism around the world is gone. The rest of the Middle Eastern countries will feel comfortable in joining an accord, whether it's the Abraham Accords or whether to decide to go join BRIC. What we're doing is we're saying, join the Abraham Accords. We want you to be a part of a post-petroleum economy, because again, the Middle East cannot rely on petroleum as their main driver of revenue.
I think they've probably got hundreds of years where they could still rely on that. To be
honest, but if you have if your use tapers off, right? If it just goes flat, and then you go to Venezuela, which is why we're over there, and they've got shit tons of oil. Russians have tons of oil. We have tons of oil. All of a sudden, oil's not worth anything. All of a sudden, oil is like water. Like, who cares? Water will actually be more valuable than oil in 20 years, is my prediction. So, let's go back to Iran, because we have to get rid of Iran. So this is just
we have to get rid of Iran because
not the country of Iran.
By the way, what do you mean by get rid of Iran? What does that mean?
It means you have to overthrow the leadership that supports radical Islam, because the people in Iran no longer support radical Islam. They no longer believe in the high tenets of Sharia law. I have friends that are Iranian and their parents live in Iran, and they're texting her all the time saying, we support this activity. We want this regime gone. We no longer want to be a part of the one and only country in the whole wide world that uses its money to pay other groups to bomb the West.
Okay, and I agree with that. And I understand Iranians, I think, better than the average guy, just being that I was stationed in Basra, Iraq, which is pretty much a very pro-Iranian area. It's
Right.
Shia population. And I've got a friend. I've had the friend on the show that actually went to Iran. I think he spent a couple weeks in Iran, openly as an American, by the way, and was very welcome. It's a pretty somewhat westernized area. It's pretty well documented that there's been, the birth of a revolution in the country for
Yeah.
what, maybe a decade or so.
Right.
And more recently, big clashes with protesters. So, I do have some affinity to the Iranian people, and obviously no affinity towards Ayatollah and the clerics, but I just look at, like, that's the same thing in Iraq too. There was cheering for Saddam Hussein to be taken out. Like, he was hated by the people, right?
And how many
Although he did
clear
win 99%
Iraq
in elections, but
hey,
he
do
was
we
hated and it was celebrated. But then we got way worse than Saddam Hussein after we got rid of him.
but now
And
it's not way worse. Now Iraq is just kind of waiting for the same thing. They're waiting to see how this global economy is going to separate itself.
I don't think they think that way. I mean, there are certainly people in Saudi Arabia, the princes, that think that way for sure. 100% agree with you on that. But I don't think that's thought of in a lot of part of the Muslim world. Not at all. They're not thinking global economics. They're thinking
but their leadership is. And so this is why
I agree with that.
But listen, we don't have all of this kind of supercell, minor cell activity that's in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, all the traditional areas where we would see kind of this radical Islamic support. And what's interesting is I think Islam in general, generally speaking, is ready to be done with radical Islam. And the world has done this before, Jay.
Boy, you got a very optimistic view. I would hope you were right. I don't think you're right at all on that.
Money and food trumps religion every time.
No, I don't.
Yes, it does.
Don't think so.
You want to look at it. You want to look at it. You want to look at it in a different way. You want to look at it from the lens of the 1970s and 80s, or maybe 1920s and 1930s. I would normally agree with you. But
there were people in 2001 that were willing to get into airliners and kill themselves
exactly.
for religion.
That cannot, it will not exist anymore. That's the whole issue. Most of Islam does not want that same ideology. And I'm going to prove this.
Okay, hold on. So you're making an argument no one I've heard make, and certainly not the President of the United States of America. It's incumbent upon to make this argument. What's that?
Trump's lying to us. He knows what's going to happen. I think he knows what's going to happen. Listen.
So you're fine with him lying to us then?
No. But
okay.
One, all politicians lie, period. Let's just.
Yeah, I know. Far be it for me to actually ask for the politicians we voted for to be a little bit more honest, right? So, because I think lies are terrible. So the fact that they lie to us is not something I give them a pass on.
Well, so then you have to go. So what is Trump's motivation now in this whole scheme that I've laid out for you? Like Israel purposely starting a war, the elimination of radical Islam in the Middle East, trying to get people to sign on to the Abraham Accords and be a part of the Western global dollar instead of the Eastern global dollar. Why is Musk going to the moon? We have all of these questions. Why did Trump send or federalize national troops in California, Chicago, and DC? Not only did he federalize the city police department in DC, he sent every federal agency out into DC during his little action. Why? Why did he do that? And I told everybody that's wrong. That usurps state sovereignty and undermines not just the wording of the Constitution, but the very idea of it.
I think your point you're trying to make here is Trump is so keen on world peace and a vibrant economy all over, including the Middle East, which is the best path to peace.
Yeah.
That's why he's doing what he's doing. Is that?
Yeah, but there's a reason why he's doing what he's doing, because the United States is going to be insolvent. So I think Trump's idea.
Right. I feel like that's a big argument against Iran and all the military intervention is we're flat out broke. We're $39 trillion in the hole.
Nope. I think Trump is actually driving us to insolvency.
On purpose.
Yes, I think. All right, I know. See, this is part of the bigger picture.
By the way, this might be some of the most coherent arguments I've heard pro this Iran war. I mean, it's insane to me to hear some of the arguments that have been made, and they don't seem to have any agreement. At least you have some kind of central thesis and a strategic long-term objective.
There is one.
I would say it could be very wrong. And so if they're
It's
trying to
not
make
going to go.
Americans
It
solvent
could
and
be, but all of the pieces that I've watched since Trump, since Obama, post COVID, pre COVID, violation of a lot of constitutional rights. Listen, when you have a constitution and it's been so diluted and kind of scapegoated, it can exist, but if nobody's following it, it doesn't matter.
right.
Like you might as
Oh,
well tear the
it
document up.
should matter. That's why people like me are so vocal about it because
I agree with
yeah,
you.
the
And
problem
I'm
with
the
the
same way. I
Constitution.
would be the first guy defending the Constitution, but I'm trying to explain to you is what is happening, what I see happening. One of the things, I think the big thing that's happening is post COVID, we shouldn't have a stock market that's where it's at, number one. Number two, and I'll just go over some points. Number two, American corporations are being consolidated at extreme rates, like venture capitalist companies, private equity companies. Uh, Edelbrock is absorbing not only their entire supply chain, but all of their competition. Right? Edelbrock is just one example. It's turning into this massive corporation. Right? Two, we had the whole Build Back Better thing, which was basically the way for the Western economies to guarantee that everybody would sign on to the 10% minimum corporate tax, right? We don't want, Biden, of course, signed that into law, right? Kind of quietly. Nobody really said anything. But why didn't IBM and GE and Tesla and General Motors all bitch and gripe about a 10% corporate minimum tax? Why? Why didn't they say anything? Where's our capitalists, right? Because the United States government made this deal with them. We're going to let you amass all of your US competition. It's no longer a competition between US companies, it's competitions between the West and the East, global corporations, right? And Trump sees this. Trump wants, I think, America to be in its best financial shape when it collapses economically. And I think he's driving it to that on purpose because he
How's he
wants to
drive?
be at
By the
that.
way, how's he drive? How would you say he's driving it? Just out of
Well,
curiosity.
okay, name. So let's look at Doge, right? What was Doge?
I don't even remember anymore.
It was
That
finding
went
all
away
of the
too
waste. It
quickly.
was finding all the waste in government, right?
Supposedly.
Okay, but did he actually change the budget? Did he spend
No,
more money?
it's
No, he
the
did the
budget's the
opposite.
same. It's not even a budget, it's a continuing resolution.
Right? He keeps spending money. But we know that right now, the bond obligations on our debt make up over half of the budget, or they exceed the other budgets. It exceeds military and exceeds health and human services. It is the largest budget expenditure we have right now. So how do we go post COVID in 7,000 stock market? And we don't have any real increases in GDP. Nobody went, oh my God, look at GDP doubled. That didn't happen. So how does the S&P 500 go from 7,000 to 50,000? You know how? Because the US government said consolidate. Because we want you to be the biggest corporation on the planet so that, Edelbrock, for instance, you can go to Europe and buy the largest parts manufacturers in Europe. And since you're all part of the corporate minimum tax, you're all going to pay 10%, but you're not going to care because your revenue is so massive. We're going to let you become so big overnight that your stock value will fly through the roof, which is what's happening. It's happening over all the entire US in almost every sector, from construction to electronics to automobiles. The US is consolidating massively so that US corporations can withstand an asset devaluation that will come when we have to restructure our debt, just like the Greeks did a couple of years ago. So if you want an example of what's going to happen to the US, the microcosm example of it is what happened to the Greeks in the EU. When the EU, when the Greeks went bankrupt, the EU had to refinance their debt. Now, we have 37 plus trillion dollars worth of debt, and it's only growing. So the rest of the world, China, India, Russia, the big G20, they all look at us and go, your debt's unsustainable. And so your bond payments, the interest that you pay on your bonds is no longer going to be 2 points like it used to be. It's now going to be 4. Why? Because you're a much higher risk. You can't even make your bond application or obligations. You're going to default. Trump knows that. I think Biden knew it. I think the whole world knows it. So who as a country can refinance American debt, Jake. Can China by itself?
I mean,
No.
no one can because the U.S. Treasury holdings is majority owned by our own country. So there's no
Nobody can
point.
refinance us. The debt is too big.
Right.
The EU could refinance Greece because
Yeah, that's
a
a
lot of
way different story. Yeah, they could all bail Greece out, but no one can do that to us.
exactly. But you know who can? The G20 collectively.
But what would be
All
their
of the
incentive to
countries
do
of
that?
the G20 could restructure through the IMF or the World Bank US debt. So they go, okay, we're going to refinance you. And all of our
Well, hold on, you keep saying refinancing us, and it's like
that's what they did in
most debt
Greece.
is not even held by them.
No, it will be. Well, it's held by a lot of it's held by
It's
every
mostly
country.
held by Americans. It's mostly
No,
held by institutional investors.
no. It's
Yeah,
held
look it up.
no,
US
it's
debt
held
is
by the
most
world. It's held by other governments. It's held by
no, it's no, that's a smaller portion of our debt. Most of our debt's held internally inside America.
no. No. And we can make our bond obligations irrespective. And corporations are no longer just US corporations. Listen, we over the course of 40 years turned the rest of the world into US style consumers. That's the goal. We want cornflakes in every grocery store around the world, right? Or Coca-Cola or whatever. We want people buying Edelbrocks and IBMs and HPs.
I just Googled it right off the bat. As of early 2026, the owner $38 trillion in U.S. national debt is primarily owned by domestic investors, including the Federal Reserve, government accounts, and U.S. financial institutions. Here's the pie chart. Foreign investors are only $6.21 trillion of it.
Right. But
You can
US
see that.
investors are 6.89, Federal Reserve, which is us,
Yeah, what I
and
just said internally inside the United States, internal U.S. Investors meaning like U.S. government, so they borrow money. That's actually the Social Security fund, trust fund
it's
is
the
all
bond
IOUs.
obligations. It's the bond obligations that we have every year to pay back the money that we borrow in order to run the US government. But
Oh,
it's
by the way, this I'm sorry, I shouldn't even put this pie chart here. This is when it was at $21 trillion. But yeah, you could just see here, and I think most people probably understand this. Like, it's not majority owned by foreign investors, and China being the top, which is like $1 trillion. It's mostly internal, right?
it doesn't matter, Jake, if you can't make the interest payment on your bond obligations at the debt levels we're
Well,
at.
we always do. We've been defaulting under debt for a while because what we do is we print out more money just to pay off the debt, which is about $1 trillion budget item now.
Yeah, but we've exceeded our ability to inflate the dollar to make the bond obligations. That much is clear.
We have no idea. I mean, I'm shocked it's lasted this long, to be perfectly frank.
What
But
I'm
that's how they rob us of our wealth. That's why life's unaffordable. I wish most Americans understood that. It's all the
I know,
politicians and their buddies at the Federal Reserve that have done that.
but here's what I think is going to happen. I think Trump is moving us into a position where there's just going to be basically two global economies, a global Western dollar, we'll call it the new dollar, and a global Eastern economy. And so the West that I see right now is amassing countries and resources, right, to surround itself with the best possible resource acquisitions that it can to join the Western economy so that when imagine creating a
This is
euro.
the argument for going to war with Iran.
Yes, imagine creating a
I
euro.
did not see this one coming. Holy cow.
Imagine creating a euro, Jake, that is good in Japan, Central America, Venezuela, Mexico, Canada, all of the countries of the EU, where you have a new global dollar and you can go to
Controlled
Venezuela.
by who? I wouldn't mind doing that through
IMF
gold
and the World
payments.
Bank,
What's that?
by the IMF and the World Bank.
Oh
The
my
G,
god.
the
Oh, and this is what
G20.
Trump supports? Get me off of that. I don't wanna be any part of that. Oh my
Okay,
god.
nobody. No, you're right. Okay, so let's just assume this happens. Let's assume Trump makes an announcement a year from now after Iran is stabilized, the Middle East is stabilized, and all these countries will start signing under the Abraham Accords, right? Because that'll be the choice. And another country just did, by the way, I think recently. And let's say Trump gets on TV and he goes, well, the IMF and the G20, so all of the countries collectively of the Western economies, are going to restructure our debt in the same way European Union countries, mostly Germany, France, Spain, England, restructured Greece's debt. And they had to go through these austerity measures. And one of the things the Greeks had to do is identify where all the waste was in their government. Where are we seeing that? Doge. It's identifying waste. It's identifying fraud. You have to listen. The way to identify who's stealing your shit, right, is to take it away from everybody. Because what happens in that room of 100 people where 50 of the people are stealing your shit and the other 50 people aren't, they really need it, is the 50 people who are stealing it kind of cower once it's gone. And the other 50 eventually start screaming and yelling, you're hurting us. We really. So all you did was identify the 50 people who really need it and the 50 people who are just wasting it. So that's what Doge is doing. Doge
doesn't even exist anymore. What do you mean
does
Doge is doing?
they went through the process already. They weeded out all the waste. They know where it's at. So when you restructure, just like the Greeks did, and I'll challenge everybody to look at how the Greece's debt got restructured by the EU. We're going to go through the same thing.
And the IMF's the control, or the G20 is the controlling
The
agents of it. By
G20
the
is
way, they're
providing
all guilty of the,
assets.
they're
No,
all guilty of the same exact thing we do in America.
but
They
they
want
get
to
to
play their
benefit as well. Listen, the one thing that you have to have in order to have equalization, the euro, the EU already went through this. In order for Germany and Spain and France and Greece and the little peant countries of the EU, in order for them to have a European Union dollar, a euro that's worth the same in all of the countries, is you have to have what's called asset equalization. Which is why Britain never got into the euro, because they didn't want to lose the valuation of British pound sterling, right? One of the oldest currencies on the planet next to the Romans, or existing currencies. But the rest of the countries said, okay, Germany took an asset valuation drop and Greece increased their asset valuation in order to bring parity to the dollar, so that the EU zone dollar is worth the same in France and in Germany and in Greece. We're going to do the same thing. So countries like Mexico that have a bad exchange rate, they're going to see an increase in their asset valuation once the debt is restructured amongst the G20. And the United States will see a decrease in its asset valuation, which is why the stock market is so stinking high, because Trump wants US corporations to be able to survive an asset devaluation in order to create asset parity with the rest of the G20.
And therefore, we should attack Iran.
No,
Honestly, this is like the newest debate style I have ever seen.
Okay, but Jake,
we have a central theme here, a central argument. I should have just stated. Maybe
the central argument is, in order to get Middle Eastern countries to buy into the Western economy and not the Eastern economy, which is BRIC, and you know they've already started trading oil in Chinese dollars, right? So everything from Bretton Woods is going bye-bye. I mean, forget it. That the old World War II deal is off. Now it's like, yeah, screw you. We don't have to trade in US dollars anymore. So why are we moving to that? So we're trying to entice countries to come to the Western dollar
by attacking Iran, because we have a joint enemy, and that's the last hold of the more Eastern thinking part of the Middle East. Is that the argument here?
No, it's just to create stability for the Middle East so that they can join a Western economy.
So the war in Iran is the stable path, right?
Yes. I'm gonna one last thing, and I'm gonna tell you this. We've done this before. Do you know when it happened before?
I can't think of it. Give me a good example of the Middle East when this has worked.
No, it didn't happen in the Middle East. It happened
exactly. The Middle East politics is way different than everything else.
And it was religious as well. You remember the Inquisitions and the Crusades?
Yeah.
Okay, so we had the Knights of Malta, the Hospitallers, the Knights Templar. All of those armies were formed to protect Catholic assets around Europe. The problem is you had monarchies and barons and dukes that were trying to protect their own assets, and all of them wanted part of the peasantry, right? They wanted the dollars, the economic activity. So after the Inquisitions were done, and you have the Knights Templar, they're running around fighting all of the monarchs who are trying to raise armies to go into a village. So the church would do this. They'd build a big abbey, they'd bring in a priest, the Knights Templar would protect those assets, and all of the peasantry was starting to believe that the church was the power of the land, and not the king, not the monarchy, not the duke, not the baron. So it came to a head in 1300. And what happened? Why were the knights arrested? Why did Friday the 13th happen? Because you had Pope Cleo, I'm going to say it's Cleo, I don't remember his name, and Philip the Fourth, right, came together and met, and they said, you know what we have? We have a lot of economic instability in Europe. You know why? Because we're both fighting over the resources of Europe, and your armies are constantly going in and taking villages. And then we're coming in by force and destroying the village. And then the Knights Templars coming in and trying to get the village back or protect the church's assets. And so instead of all of this fighting, why don't we just create economic stability in Europe, in Central Europe, by you eliminate all your armies and we'll eliminate all the fighting on our end. And so King Philip talked to the Pope into letting him arrest all of the Templars in France. And what was the charge that they leveled against the Knights Templar?
Tell me.
You don't know? Heresy. Of all things, heresy. The Pope allowed King Philip to charge his armies and all of their leaders that existed for 300 years with heresy.
And
the
this
Pope, a church.
This is the best example of
yes, because the church had radical Catholicism. It had a violent army that it could send out and fight against the monarchies for control of resources and land. And the monarchies were fighting back for that control. The Catholic schism happens during this time frame, right? So
I gotta just say to my audience, I really didn't see this conversation.
Okay, but the other thing is this happened before. So Philip rounds up all the Knights.
Hold on, I've got maybe eight minutes left.
Okay, but what happened? What happened though after the Knights were disbanded for heresy, which the Pope allowed, and the Church gave up fighting in Middle Europe, and the monarchies gave up fighting in Middle Europe? What is the next thing that happens? The Renaissance. You have all of this economic activity and people talking about different things. It created economic stability by creating a stability of violence. It rid Europe of all of the violence that marked Europe for 300, 400 years.
Trump's got such great wisdom. He sees this. And
I think they saw it back when COVID happened. In fact, a part of me thinks that COVID was brought on by the Chinese in order to collapse Western banking, right? Like, because they're formulating BRIC at the time. What if it is?
Oh, man. See, I'm just going to say, I think you're so wrong on all this stuff, just to be honest with you. I think you're so wrong.
I'm not wrong on any of this.
You're giving these guys a lot more credit, but even if this was their line of thinking and all of it, I still am as opposed to this war in Iran as I was before, because it's like, I don't think they're going to get it right. And we diplomats in America.
It will get it right because it's all the time. It's the last one. It's the Knights Templar of the Middle East in the current age. Nothing happened after the Knights Templar.
So what needs to happen then from now on? The Ayatollah was killed. What needs to happen now on to usher in this new era?
They're going to basically usher in a stable government, and then the U.S.
Who is? We are America?
Yes, whoever.
And do you have any
Israel, other? Maybe Saudi Arabia, maybe Syria.
Hold on. Can you point to any other successful regime change in the Middle East in modern day?
We don't live in the 1970s anymore, Jay.
I'm talking about like just even the last 2 decades.
Venezuela.
That's not the Middle East, last I checked. And by the way, Venezuela didn't have a regime change. The vice president's in charge.
But listen, Gaza, that's successful. People didn't like it.
What?
Gaza is going to be an economic free zone. I mean, it's going to be back to being part of Israel. That's part of the deal, right? That's what Israel wanted.
Oh, Don. Man.
The end of the Iranian conflict will bring stability to the Middle East and heavy Western banking and economic activity in the Middle East. All of that is wanted by U.S. corporations. All of it is wanted by the majority of Muslims in the Middle East. And that's what that's going to create in that zone. Ukraine and Russia is a little bit different story, but it's all kind of globally related, because I'm going to give you this hypothesis, this hypothetical. In 1 year from now, if Trump does come to the table and says, listen, we made this deal with the IMF and the G20, They're going to restructure that $40 trillion worth of debt that we now have. And when they do that, we have two things that we have to do. One, we have to issue a new Western dollar that's going to create economic parity in the Western banking world. So, in order for us, the G20, to restructure, they're going to have increase in asset valuation. We're going to have to lower our asset valuations, which is the stock market, by the way, in order to create a Western dollar. What is the first thing that patriots in America will do?
If we,
They're going to run to their capitals violently. They will be open rebellion. And what is the state National Guard able to do? Nothing, because part of them will be actually probably joining in the rebellion. So what does Trump need to be able to do? He needs to be able to send U.S. military into those areas that are going to see open rebellion. Why was he doing that in California? Why did he do it in Chicago? Because he wanted to get rid of crime? Bullshit. He's testing the legality of putting federal troops and nationalizing state troops in an independent sovereign state.
It does seem like that, which is one of the reasons I was very opposed to it.
And so was I. And he did it in DC. So if you're going to announce something like a new dollar that's no longer sovereign to the United States, but is part of a euro, a new euro, a Western dollar, you need to protect the seat of government. And what did he do in DC? He made sure that legally he can protect the seat of government. And all of those politicians that'll be down there, and all of the people that are going to get in their pickup trucks from South Carolina or Minnesota and drive down to the Capitol and go try to start some violent shit. He needs to know that when he makes that announcement and that happens, that they'll be able to protect it. All of these are little pieces of this puzzle that point me to the fact that we have two economic ideologies that are fighting for countries and resources globally that'll create an Eastern dollar and a Western dollar. And that will be it. There'll be no more sovereign US dollar. They may call it a US dollar. They may call it a new dollar. Who knows? Who gives a shit? At the end of the day, we want Venezuela to be on board because A, they're our neighbors, and B, they have shit tons of oil. If you leave that to the Russians, you're going to have an Eastern dollar country living in your backyard with shit tons of natural resources. That's why he's gone. I mean,
all right, I got to end it there, Don. I will say this was not at all the conversation I was going to have. Don and I go back well over a decade. We were both very big in the Ron Paul movement, Tea Party movement. Don was one of my original buddies from politics that got into the MAGA movement big. Your patriotism is very long. You got a storied resume. You're a peacemaker inside the ranks of the conservative movement. I was hoping to have a more poignant conversation on Iran. As K-Liquid wrote, Don has got to be just trolling at this point. Maybe, I don't know. I think he's trying to build off of something. Don, if people want to continue this conversation, I guess they can find you on Facebook, or is there anything else I can point people to? I know you don't have a show or...
Listen, if you guys think that Trump lost the election unfairly, we did, because the other side of this coin is the people that cheated and won because it was meant to stop what everybody knew was happening on the other side of the aisle. That's it.
Well, I don't think they have a clue. I don't think they're
they all
important things. Maybe the elites, but
remember, we're an oligarchy. We're not run by a
bunch that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. I'm not going to take
run by a bunch of really smart globalists from around both that believe in one ideology or believe in the other ideology.
Oh, that's fair.
So those are the ideologies that are fighting right now in the world economically.
Gotcha. Well, thanks, Don, very much for joining us.
Did we answer the question? So is everybody just going to let Iran happen? Can we just be done and go, okay, fine, whatever happens over there, we're going to be finished with it. Let's just move on, right?
All right, Don, thanks. Bye. That just was an interesting conversation, I'll put it that way, but it was good catching up with Don. I'm going to do a post show here with some more of my thoughts. If you're a premium insider, join us on the post show. If you're not, go to truthhurtsnews.com and you can click on support us on the top, or on Rumble. You can just click on join us. Even after the fact, you can join the post show and watch it in review. Thank you to our sponsor, Alpine Chemistry in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And thank you to EliteGuardianImmun.com. If you're looking for your next permit to carry course in Minnesota, go to EliteGuardianImmun.com and just click right there, EliteGuardianImmun.com. Post show starting here in 30 seconds. For everyone else, I will see you next week.